Here is one of my favorite pictures from the history of science. Who's that? Mendel, Gregor Mendel, the founder of genetics, really. Described as Austrian, the Moravian. He wasn't a monk, he was a friar. They are different, I sort of don't care. Gregor Mendel, the Moravian friar, there he is holding what type of plant? No, a petunia. I don't know why he's holding a petunia. A pea is a very reasonable answer to that question, but it's a petunia. We often see this picture of him that is framed out, but I just really like showing the rest of his literal brothers here, because I think they're just having a really stylish time. And this guy looks like, what's this guy doing? Don't know. Check me out. And I don't know, he's kind of scary. So Mendel does his amazing work, what I think is probably one of the greatest experiments in the history of science in the 1850s and 60s, where he breeds together 29,000 pea plants, and with that, statistical patterns emerge that demonstrate that characteristics are passed in discrete packages and predictable statistical formations from generation to generation. You know from school, it's peas being wrinkly or smooth, or leaves, petals being purple or white, and they don't blend, they come out in discrete phenotypes. And these are the foundational principles of inheritance, units of inheritance which become characterized in 1900 as genes, right? Foundations of genetics. The work is written in German, and it's translated into English in 1900, and then becomes part of the pantheon of 20th century biology, a sort of founding part of it. There's nothing wrong with this, and Mendel is exonerated. He's not a bad guy, as far as I'm aware. So he gets a full pass from me on this. But his work lands in Davenport's lap at exactly the right time for Davenport, or the wrong time for American undesirable citizens. Because it suddenly gives Davenport and the eugenicists of the Eugenics Records Office in Cold Spring Harbor a mechanism on which they can act, a pivot on which they can enact their eugenics ideas. And Davenport and the Americans in general at this time become obsessed with the notion that every single characteristic in humans is defined and determined by a single gene. Just like there is a gene for wrinkliness or smoothness in peas, or a gene for purple or white petals, a dominant or negative. You remember this from GCSE biology. Davenport becomes obsessed with the idea that all human characteristics also follow this inheritance pattern. Now, what is the characteristic, the human characteristic, that we use to teach Mendelian inheritance in humans? What is the first characteristics we teach to children? Eye color, right? We all know this, right? There is a gene or an allele, more accurately, that encodes blue eyes, and it's recessive to brown eyes. So you draw a little Punnett square table out, and you put big B, little b, big B, little b, big B, big B, big B, little b, you know, right? Who was the person who published and described this work first? It was Charles Davenport in 1907, The Heredity of Eye Color in Man. This pattern is described for the first time in this paper by Davenport. Now, you know that it's not true, right? You know that if you're doing your GCSEs now, you write what's in the paper. But it's not true. There are dozens of genes involved in influencing, not determining, eye color. And parents, it is probabilistic, because genetics is probabilistic and not deterministic. But you can't really accurately determine the eye color of your children based on the eye color of your parents. And further than that, eye color is not a binary thing. There aren't blue eyes and brown eyes. They have different eye patterns in the same eye. Some people have heterochromia, where they have different eye color in both eyes. So it's probabilistic, and you can make predictions about what eye color will be based on the genotype, but they are predictions. They are not deterministic patterns. But the idea that it is deterministic comes specifically from Davenport himself. Now, in referencing the fact that there are not just blue eyes and brown eyes, he acknowledges that in the original paper and says, and this is a direct quote from this original paper, that hazel eyes exist, but we assume that they're blue. I don't really know what to do with that. What is the second human characteristic that we use to describe human traits that are dominant or negative? Not tongue rolling is a good one. What? Oh, see, all the geneticists are out here. So earlobes is one, that comes later. Not tongue rolling, that's also not... no. Oh, come on, I was going to do hair color. Come on, ginger hairedness. So MC1R is a gene that recessive alleles for which are responsible for red-hairedness. Now, this also comes from Davenport, published in 1909, where he describes the inheritance pattern of ginger hairedness. This is a caption from a joke report from, I don't know if you can see it, red hair is created by an endangered gene. These babies are cowering because genetics is coming to get them. Now, Davenport didn't have molecular genetics or large-scale GWASs to aid him in this, but in the most recent assessment of hair color from the UK Biobank, one of the great data sets for genetics, what was published about, I think it was 2018, showed that more than 75% of people who have two alleles that supposedly encode ginger hair do not have ginger hair. We don't really know how hair color and eye color work. And these are the most obvious and easiest examples of Mendelian inheritance in humans. They are the basis of how we teach genetics to school children. And yet, both of them come directly from the father of American eugenics with the specific intention of demonstrating that Mendelian inheritance in man, in humans, but he said in man, was something on which we could act, on which we could breed people so that they had traits that were more desirable and breed out people who had traits which were undesirable. He also did work that demonstrated, as far as he was concerned, that sexual proclivity was also Mendelian and monogenic and deterministic, so based on working with sex workers, prostitutes, and also that seafaringness ran in families in a Mendelian way. He was the first person to publish the Mendelian pattern of inheritance for Huntington's disease, and he actually got the mechanism or the inheritance pattern for this correct. It is autosomal dominant. Willie Guthrie there died of Huntington's. But in the abstract for this paper, he attributes the origin of Huntington's to 3 immigrant brothers from 100 years, which we don't know whether they existed or not, but it's quite clearly associated with the politics of the time where eugenics is considered a facet of immigration. I've still got 10 slides to go. All right, thanks, mate. I don't know who you are, but I like you. Now, contemporary research on this is really important, and this is I think this is the most important reason why we need to know this and why we need to study this. And it is based around the idea that over the short history of genetics, we have moved from this Mendelian one-to-one relationship between monogenic deterministic thinking to a complex multifactorial idea that many genes interacting with the environment and epigenetic factors is the whole symphony of what becomes the phenotype and the behaviors of individuals. So this is the trajectory of genetics over the course of 100 years. But we continue to teach Mendel first. We continue to teach eye color and hair color, and that genes are these discrete factors which are inherited in these very clear inheritance patterns, which is basically not true. Now, research has begun to emerge in the last 5 years where class cohorts in America and a small study based in Leeds has actually tested what the outcome of teaching this type of biology, this type of genetics to school-age children. And what they found, this is work by Brian Donovan, the paper is Carver et al., 2017. The work shows that if you take one cohort and you teach them the traditional way, which starts with Mendel and goes on to complexity and diseases later, and you take another cohort and you teach them complexity and diseases first, but the total amount of content is the same, that you end up with cohorts where the first one, where you teach Mendelian inheritance first, end up with a much more racialized, essentialized view of genetics than the second. Now, these are preliminary studies. I don't have reason to doubt them, but we need to do more research into this. But if they hold up over the next few years, then basically, not only have we been teaching genetics wrong for a century, but we've been offering a disservice to the genetics community by teaching a version of genetics which is not only wrong, but it reinforces ideas of racial essentialism which have been outmoded for decades. So we are offering not just a disservice to biology students and to genetics, and also to Mendel, who pointed out in his original paper that those flowers and those plants were not wild type. They were already bred so that those characteristics were being expressed in a controlled background. And he also goes on to say, don't apply this to humans, because humans are really complex. But we ignored all of that for 100 years, and instead we've embraced the eugenicists' view that all characteristics are determined by single genes. And that is what we teach to school children.